But I want to pick up that other thread that I dropped out here. Mindfulness. Mindfulness is the capacity to observe what's happening in successive moments of consciousness. And there's a wonderful teaching from the Buddha called the Satipatthana Sutra. Sati means mindfulness, heart mindfulness. Patthana, staying compact, staying nearby, and the practice is Satipatthana Vipassana, and the word Vipassana is really elegant, and it means perceiving reality as it actually is. So, we go to a quiet place, we sit down, comfortably upright, and the text says the meditator puts mindfulness before him or herself, and then observes, notices the body. Notices the body breathing in and breathing out. Notices whether it's a short breath or a long breath. Really notices all the intimate details of the breath. With that breath as home base, then, something starts happening, which is the fact that the mind wanders so much becomes readily apparent. And the first and most significant misunderstanding that people have about meditation is that when you're doing it properly, there will be no wandering of the mind and you'll be in bliss. And those are lovely moments. But if you define that as success, you're going to get really frustrated. Have you noticed? Stop your mind from wandering. Stay here. It's so much more relaxed. It's so much more functional to, when the mind wanders, to recognize that's part of the natural history of a human being. That's a part of us. And to notice that and to receive it with love. Love meaning there's room for it. So our meditation doesn't become a battle to get back to the breath. It's, mind wandering, thank you for sharing, back to the breath. So, we pay attention to the body breathing. We pay attention to the body in sitting, standing, walking, and lying down. When you walked your car from here this morning, when your hands hit the crash bars leaving the building, you might take that as an alert to be aware of stepping out into the beautiful sunshine. What's that? Weird. And then don't forget your sunscreen. Had a funny experience actually 2 days ago. We gave my stepdaughter a plane ticket to Hawaii to visit her best friend who's going to the University of Hawaii. And on Thursday afternoon at the airport, I did a parental thing at the car. The last thing I said was, use the sunscreen. Yesterday we had a phone call with a very sunburned girl from Hawaii. And I did it. I shouldn't have done it, but I said, what did I say at the car? So, we're mindful of the body and its postures. We're mindful of the body when it eats, when it goes to the toilet, when it showers. So we can pay attention to just that, and it will change your life if you start paying, or when you're driving. Here I am, turning left, turning right. But that's only one aspect of a human being. That's the first foundation of mindfulness. There's a second foundation of mindfulness to which I alluded at the beginning and Jim touched on in the movement. And it's poorly named, pay attention to feelings. The word in Pali language is Vedana, and the word that I like better is valence, which comes from chemistry more. And the essence of it is that when there is a sense contact, when a sound hits the ear, it is instantaneously pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, not yet decided. Notice the difference? There's this flinching, it's unpleasant. And that's true with every sight, smell, taste, touch, and everything that happens in the mind. There's pleasant thoughts and unpleasant thoughts, and neutral. Lots of life is neutral, and we don't pay attention to it very much. That's one of the reasons it's challenging to pay attention to the breath, because it's not cheesier, saltier, it's not beeping, it's not vibrating, it's just life. But we train the mind, we train our capacity to pay attention to these neutral phenomena, because that's where peace lies. Peace lies in being able to abide there, and also not to get blown out of the water by the pleasant or the unpleasant. To just notice it all coming and going. So that's the second foundation of mindfulness. I think I'm going to take this off. The third foundation of mindfulness, the third pasture of abiding, the third part of a human's experience that we learn to attend to, is all the storytelling, mental formations. Where does your childhood exist? It exists in your thoughts about it. Right? Mental formations. And they affect us profoundly. Where does trauma exist? It exists in the body and in the stories that we have in the mind. And we have, if we happen to have fallen into an ideological camp, we have an ideological story. And these stories affect us profoundly. When we listen to or watch the news, there are mental formations that come in, and then we have liking and disliking. And the fourth foundation of mindfulness is the subtle details, the phenomena that occur in the mind. Many of you know the 5 hindrances: desire, aversion, restlessness, sloth, and torpor, and doubt. Or you know, right now we could do it seeing or hearing or smelling. These are phenomena which are the building blocks of our experience. So one could say, why spend all the trouble? Why go to all the trouble to learn to tease myself apart like this? What's the point? Well, it's to be more conscious of our experience, and therefore to be able to make more skillful choices. But there's a deeper, ultimate purpose, which is to really deeply realize that none of this stuff that I experience is me. It's odd, isn't it? It's kind of a lot of work to do to just discover there's nobody there. However, the more I can assume that position of just awareness in the face of life's vicissitudes, that little poem I read, I get to live a happy life. What's touching and sort of humorous about that Ellen Bass poem is that it's all true. Not the particular details, but have you noticed how utterly unpredictable and out of control and frequently disappointing your life is? You should try harder to have it not do that. And you should have had a different family of origin and with less trauma. And the world should be a more stable place, but it's not. And so from now till our last breath, the rug's going to get pulled out in so many different ways. How are we going to deal with it? How much suffering and extra suffering will we create because we're not able to accept, oh, this is the way life is. I've done a bunch of teaching lately. Did I tell the story here of my student whose daughter had the back injury and surgery? No. It's quite instructive. It was about 17 years ago. A woman a little younger than myself, maybe a year or two, had a daughter who had a back injury and then surgery. And the surgery was done, of course, in the hospital, and she contracted one of those terrible infections. And so she was in the ICU, and it looked like she was dying. And the woman, my student, became very upset, kind of hysterical about it, and the other children were there, and it was a big family uproar. And then the daughter recovered. And my student went off to the Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts for a year and 6 months, where she did meditation with lots of different teachers that came through and several periods of 2 weeks or so of very intensive practice. And she found it very deepening, and she came back. And she had quite a transformation of personality. She had a lot of depth capacity to observe herself. And lo and behold, this is 2 years after the fact, the vicious infection came roaring out again. Same hospital, same ICU. And my student had tremendous equanimity about it. She was very concerned, and she would she'd give up her life for her child. But the family didn't go and meditate for a year and a half. And they experienced her and accused her of being cold and distant and no longer caring. Meanwhile, she was profoundly at ease, worried, it's her daughter, but she didn't add all that extra suffering that came from the mental formations coming in. Oh, what if she dies? And all that stuff that is so natural for us. This is the taste of freedom in the middle, I think. It's the freedom from having to identify with our thoughts and emotions. The freedom from having to identify with physical sensations in the body. Right? So one of the things we learn through our sitting is that there's pain, and then there's the aversion to the pain, the disliking the pain, which causes all the suffering. And then there's relief from both of these. That we have moments when it's quite funny to be sitting. It's clearer when sitting. I'm sitting, and and there's resistance to the sitting, and there's suffering, and then the mind wanders off. I got to paint the house next summer, and there's no suffering for a while because there's no focusing on it. How strange is that? So I want to go back over the liking and disliking phenomenon, because we can really make great use of it. Please turn awareness inward in your body and find some sensation which is unpleasant. It's just a little unpleasant. Can you find one? Raise your hand if you can find one. Okay, great. What a bunch of uncomfortable people. Either the chairs here suck. It's not true. It's just Ruth Dennison would have us sometimes. She would have us bend, or someone who said that they didn't feel any discomfort, bend a finger like this and then sit on it. And then she'd keep us there for a long time, which was instructive. Because you'd be feeling the pain and then you'd be hating her. Right? It's like, hurry up, get this over with, but you didn't want to move because, but that was instructive too. I'm in pain, so therefore I'm angry at someone. When I'm volitionally putting my own finger under my butt to sit on in a bad way. But, you ever gotten caught in traffic? Or you ever been at the checkout and there's impatience and there's the person who can't count their change or they're using coupons or the person at the cash is changing the roll and they can't get the damn roll to go in, and you dislike them. That's very human of us. And maybe even you act out in some way. Certainly act out internally, perhaps. But then maybe even say something and create a mess. This certainly is the case in our intimate relationships and relationships with friends and children. So, paying attention to the unpleasant sensation in your body right now. And now, can you find a pleasant sensation? Maybe a little warmth or a little buzzy vibration, or there's a way to provoke one, which is kind of nice, which is allow the corners of your mouth to go up just a little bit. Just fake a little smile. Sort of pleasant. And now find some neutral sensations. There's lots of them. So, why do we move so much? We move to relieve ourselves of unpleasant sensations. And human beings are a pretty moving group. If you watch people in a restaurant sometimes, it's really quite funny how much we're moving. Something I've always gotten a kick out of too is if you're at the theater, or maybe even better, the symphony, and everyone's very quiet. And then there's boom, 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 and there's the last cadenza. It's like, it's done. And the coughing erupts. And everyone's been waiting to get their... It's funny. 40 years ago, I went to India with a group of Lewis and Clark students for 5 months, which was insane. And we were headquartered for the first 6 weeks in Pune, in India, which is where the Rajneesh was at that point. This is way before he came here. And there'd be maybe 1,000 people, and he would come in one of his Rolls Royces, and there were these big goons that stood all through it, big, like 6'6" guys in an outfit, and you weren't allowed to cough once he got out of his vehicle. And so, and they'd come and eject you if you coughed. And so the vehicle would appear, and everybody it was India, such a polluted place. Everyone would have this upper respiratory catarrh, and this roar of coughing would happen, and then go silent when he got out of his car. It was weird. We also had to get sniffed on the way in, because if you had any hint of toiletry scent on you, you had to go sit in a special place at the back. It was wild, and it was so predictable what would happen when they came here. But back to liking and disliking. Liking and disliking drive the world. We want pleasure. We want central heating. We want our own car to take us to someplace. I mean, it drives oil policy, liking and disliking. So, what we can do is, just as we can take mindfulness of breathing as an intentional practice for today, for instance, you could, when you leave, observe liking and disliking for the rest of the day. And you'll discover there are visual objects you like. So a practice I like to do when I'm in congested places like the mall is walk with my eyes a little soft and notice the liking and disliking of the individuals that come into my view. There's everything all the way from attraction, it's like, ooh, liking, to disliking. And then if we do that, we can observe what our biases are and our prejudices. And there's another category of persons that don't even register. That's interesting to note too. I didn't used to notice, quote, old people. They're sort of irrelevant, you know. Now that I am one, I notice old people a lot. I notice, I had a walker for 2 weeks when I came out of the hospital 8 weeks ago, and there was a day when I had brain surgery to repair an aneurysm, and great good fortune that it was found accidentally, really. And I was walking up my street. It's a very slight hill. The sun was coming from the west, and I was hunched over my walker, and I looked over at the shadow. It was really the shadow of an old man walking up the street with a walker. It was shocking to me. I did decide that since I could, I would stand up straight and walk. But I notice that a lot now. I notice people that way. When you're hungry today, you could pause and notice, I'm hungry. Where? So then mindfulness of the body, how do I know that I'm hungry? What's the body saying and how does it say it? And then what are the images that are coming to mind? You know, is there an image of the fridge or a favorite restaurant and the experience of hunger is totally different when there's going to be food, when there isn't going to be food. Hunger without food is, not that I've really experienced very much of it in my life, a little bit of fasting, but I've never been out of food for very long. So then you can practice being aware of preferences in food, that when your plate comes or when you're creating your plate, what jumps out at you? What's the first thing you're going to eat? We know that because of liking and disliking. Same in flavor. Intimate relationships, friendships. I find it fascinating how in the course of a few minutes maybe, or an afternoon, how my liking and disliking with my wife Jennifer goes, the needle jumps all over the place. Conversation gets a little boring or a little tedious, or she's asking me to do something that I don't want to do, and there's this, and then there's this great appreciation and gratitude and loving. It's all over the map all day because those feelings are what drive us. So, is this making sense of how mindfulness of liking and disliking is liberating? There's one more piece I can share. I want to leave some time for questions and comments, but there's a great teaching called the 12 Steps of Dependent Origination. And the moment arises, they say, like this. Because there are 6 sense doors, there's contact. And contact leads to feeling, which is this Vedana, pleasant, unpleasant, indeterminate. Valence leads to craving. I want it, or I don't want it. Craving leads to grasping, in which case I act. And I become again that impulse, and I can reinforce it. Let's say it's a greedy impulse. And, there's the image of Mother's taffy cookies arises. I remember buying it, which I generally don't do because it's a terrible weakness on my part, but Mother's taffy biscuits. So a moment of, I'm passing through the kitchen, and the upper shelf there where the cookies are, or were, pops up, and then desire arises. And then if it's unobserved, the cookies are gone. Just like that, right? Total obsessive, compulsive, addictive. If it's noticed arising, there's some choice. Oh, there's that pleasant fantasy of a cookie in the mouth. Do I really need that? I just had dinner, It's totally unnecessary. And so the habit of reinforcing that gets broken. And there's a moment of freedom. And we could substitute that for any substance of abuse or any behavior of abuse that hurts us. And similarly, and I always think of the same example when I do this, maybe the impulse arises an image of maybe doing some yoga. And it could arise and disappear, or it's noticed and then somehow it's valued. Oh, that's a positive thing. I'm trying to take better care of myself. And then we act on it, and we become a person who's done a little yoga. And so I hope you're plugging in your own desires to become less of some things and more of some other things. And the key is this liking and disliking at the level of mind. Okay. What do you think? Any observations, any discoveries you made doing this?
Robert, I was thinking about the story about your student and her daughter with the operation.
Yeah.
So my question is large expression of emotion the same thing as being attached to emotion, or is it the way in which she was expressing her big emotion? Can somebody who is reasonably detached after a lot of years of doing practice, do big emotions still come up? And if so, how does the expression of big emotions when you are detached different from the expression of big emotions when you're not?
That's a good question. As I make sense of it, that skillfully, for instance, doing the big emotions in the hospital room doesn't help the person who's sick. And you can do an evaluation. Is this a place? I have an exemplary story, I think. Long time ago, we had a little dog, like my dog Budo, who many of you know, but named Kali. And Kali was an escape artist. And I did my very best to build the fence, but she got out and she got hit by a car. And we found her, and she was missing a patch of skin, and she was very dead. And so we carried her home, and my partner at the time, Nancy Turner, who was really very much a part of the building of PIMC. There's a picture of us outside there. The place wouldn't exist without Nancy, actually. she really understood real estate and remodeling, and she would pump me up sometimes when I would run completely out of gas and become despairing. Anyway, Collie was primarily her dog. She curled up around Collie, and I held her while I spooned her while she was around the dog. And then when she was done, I knew I had a big lump in my throat. I knew there was something brewing. And I asked her, would it be okay with you if I held her and sat on the couch? And I want to let go. And she said, okay. And I said, it could get loud. And so I got Collie in my lap, and there was her skin showing. And there was this lump. And I focused on the lump, and it turned into softening. And then it became this roaring, this crying, yelling, expletives directed toward God, which was interesting. And it just roared out for a little while. Something very similar to this happened when I first saw my father in death on a gurney. And so that came, and then it was done. And the next morning when we buried her outside the front door, once again I started feeling lots of energy, and everyone went inside, and I found myself pounding on the ground and quietly yelling. And it was very cathartic and grief releasing, and that was remarkably the end of my grief with that dog. I'd never had an experience like that before. But it was I missed her a little bit every now and then, but there was something about allowing it to really happen that was very healing. But I picked my context carefully. It wasn't, I didn't have, and the other thing was, when I had her on my lap, I was very mindful, and there was I had the sense, someone who didn't know me would really think I was totally out of control. And had I needed to stop, I could have stopped in a second. I wasn't out of control. There was a profound manifestation of affect, emotion, but there was total mindfulness. So it was, in a way, there was the capacity of observing and a natural expression, but it was there was some choice in it. I haven't observed the practice making myself or anyone that I've known deeply unfeeling or uncaring. Quite the opposite. Anybody else? Thank you. Oh, good.
I've always struggled with the concept of not being overly attached to liking and disliking, going a little too far and not being able, and feeling guilty or feeling like it's somehow wrong to enjoy life, which obviously is problematic. So do you have any guidance in terms of recognizing the limitations of liking and disliking, but not having that interfere with actually liking things and actually enjoying things in the moment?
You speak to someone who has suffered a similar affliction. I had a marvelous conversation with Ajahn Sumedho. Many of you have heard me talk about him or met him. He's now in his mid to late 80s, senior Western Thai forest monk. Anyway, I had a conversation with him one time on retreat, which I'm not sure what he said, but the message I took from it, and I held myself together. It seemed wrong to sob in front of a monk, you know. The message I took from it was it really is okay to be alive. And it's okay to live fully. I found myself sitting under a tree and just weeping and weeping with that message. And one way that it makes sense to me is with the 12 steps of dependent origination model. There's 6 sense doors. There's contact. There's feeling. There's liking and disliking. Then there's craving. Then there's grasping and around the circle. The way mindfulness teases time open, there's an opportunity to reflect, is this pleasure harmful of myself or anybody else? And it's not? How wonderful. Why not mindfully dive right in? And if it were harmful to self or other, then there'd be the question, well, maybe I don't want to do this. It's like the mother's taffy cookies. It's not good for me to eat so many of those things. So it would make sense to be a little restraining, but on those occasions when I say yes, and 3 would be great, and then take some time to really, and that could be any pleasure. That makes sense? It's a not so helpful conditioning, this one, which for me it came from my Catholic childhood, right? Original sin. Your very existence is a sin. Weeks. We humans come up with some pretty crazy worldviews. Please, Vic.
So last month when we had our mindful hike, we were hiking along the Clackamas River Trail, and one portion of the exercise we tried was to say, just look around you, or be aware of what you're doing in terms of liking, disliking, and being neutral. And we tried to do that for about 20 minutes as we were hiking. And one of the interesting things I found was there was obviously beautiful things that I liked, like the big trees in the Clackamas Wilderness. There was the river flowing by, that was beautiful. Occasionally we would hear the road noise that was not liking. But about 90% of the time, even in this beautiful space, was neutral.
Uh-huh.
The little rocks and pebbles, there was no feeling of liking or disliking about it.
Kind of a relief.
It is, but also it kind of made me think, wow, can I do something to make boredom more interesting? It's 90% of what I'm doing. With little occasional pieces of liking and disliking, if boredom is 90% of the feeling, can that be useful? I guess was an interesting thought. I don't know if that makes sense.
In meditation, on retreat particularly, it will become really apparent at times. The state of boredom will emerge full-blown. And Chogyam Trungpa, Tibetan teacher, in one of his books said, if boredom comes up and gets big, just die into boredom. And I would say it differently, which is observe boredom carefully, and you'll discover it is very interesting as a state. It's like, where's the object? I've got to have something. There's a desperation in boredom often, because we're so unbored. These things are the, there's this posture. Our poor kids are not becoming equipped at all to deal with boredom. I used to go with my mother, very complicated reason, but we would go to the French Catholic Mass at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I didn't speak French, certainly not well enough to understand what was happening in the Mass. And so I'd have an hour of nothing happening. And it was great for me. I learned a ton. One thing I learned, there were hanging lights, big hanging lights in this church. And when we would sit at the back, I would use my super breath, and I would blow the first one, and then I'd be imagining it swinging, and then I'd have to blow the second one at exactly the right second in order to sync, and I'd get them all going at the same time. It was very impressive. And no wandering mind. I would also sometimes stare at the priest with just such intensity that a brilliant white light would form around him. So it was good. However, had I had one of these, I bet kids in church are on their phones all the time. Because, well, we have two friends, Paige and Adrian. Paige Freeborn and Adrian Dick, who went through the teacher training program that I did with Jim and all the rest of the gang. And they teach in Vancouver, BC. They teach at a school, Brockton Academy or something. And at the door to the classrooms, they have phone nests. And all the phones go in the nest. We don't do that in our schools here. The kids have their phones. It's the craziest thing in the world. So anyway, back to boredom. Letting boredom be. And what happens, of course, is that as boredom becomes interesting, it no longer is a problem. As boredom as a state is interesting, not boredom that we figure out how to make it more interesting by looking at the pebbles, but we surrender into it being what it is. And it waxes and wanes. Anybody else?
Over the past year, I have opened a new window to understanding liking and disliking and craving and satisfaction. I contracted throat cancer last year and went through treatment, and my taste buds were irradiated, and so I have very little taste right now. And actually what I do have is usually mostly unpleasant. Everything is mildly unpleasant. And so the decades of cravings that we have to satisfy all those many things, all those little moments, the cookies on the shelf, those moments are empty now, pretty much. And it's really interesting. I'm not gaining weight. That's a good thing. My cholesterol is awesome because I just had my checkup and the doctor's like, hey, you're great. I'm like, well, the temptations they're still there. That's the thing. So just because I can't taste it doesn't mean that when I see it or smell it, I can still smell, which is. And so going through the holiday season, and I baked probably 12 dozen cookies, but I didn't eat any of them. And they're the ones that my grandmother used to bake. And so there's, these, it isn't just the taste, there's these memories and feelings and emotions attached to them. And so had a lot of opportunities to be mindful, of those cravings and what is it I'm feeling and what is it I'm remembering. And it's fascinating. And to sort of confront that almost every time I go to eat, I have to eat. But now it's sort of like I eat to just, it's medicine, it's nutrients, it's whatever. And I can have things and almost everything tastes kind of sour. So even like ice cream tastes like it's been sitting in vinegar. Yeah, I know, right? But and I've gotten to a point but it's okay. And at one point I had something a few months ago, I had this soup, it tasted literally like vomit. I ate the whole bowl. It's like, that's okay, And so again, it's nothing I would wish on anybody, it's nothing I would choose, and there is, a possibility that it could improve and get better, yay. But if this is where it's okay, and being aware of those things, and I still have cravings, it's like, yeah, but it's not going to be satisfied. It'll be interesting to see if it does get better, can I keep that? Can I hold on to that and know that, it's still not going to really be satisfied, right? That's a trick. We'll see. We'll see. I'll let you know as time progresses how that goes. But it's been a wonderful experience of learning about that, how a big part of our lives that is, those cravings for food and taste and flavor and joy. But there's so many other things to enjoy and taste and savor.
How wonderful you've had the Dharma through this. To use such an event as an educational adventure rather than a catastrophe. Wow. Thank you. Well, I think I hear wild creatures in the chute. So thank you so much for being here. Do make time to practice. Remember when you hit the crash bar to be mindful, at least to your car. And do please stay, and we'll do a little ceremony with the kids to get them out of here and into their lives. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone in the outer circle who'd like to come in and be close to the candle for the blowing out, you're welcome to come in. Hi. May I hold your hand? No? Okay. May I touch your shoulder? No? Okay. May I hold your hand? No. All right. May I hold your hand? Yes, I'll be just fine. Thank you. How about you? Hey, look at that. Oh, good. So, it is so precious to be alive and to be able to walk and breathe and see and be here. Feel the hand on your right and give it a little squeeze. Wish this person well. And now the person on your left, wishing them well. Wishing you well as we walk each other home. And so to all of us in these circles and all of our younger friends here sitting around the candle, to everyone who's ever been in this room in 90 years, to all of our friends and relations, our friends and relations who live in the sky, who live in the trees, who live on the ground, who live underground and in the waters. May all beings everywhere know happiness and the causes of happiness. And so, do we have you guys? All right, hang on. Are you ready? Okay. Oh, looks like it's three of you. Let's everybody get close to the microphone.
Hey, you tilted.
1, 2, 3.
May all beings be happy. May all beings be happy. May all beings be happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you very much. Oop. Thank you. Well, does everyone have a wish? You got a wish? You got a wish? Those of you far out have to blow really hard. Especially those of you up there, you're going to have to really blow. But I could move those church lights so you could certainly blow out a candle. All right, is everyone ready? Breathing in deep. 1, 2, 3, blow. Whoa, that candle didn't stand a chance. Yay, thank you. Thank you all. And do please come and have some schmoozing time in the living room. Hey, you. Oh, hang on. Hey, listen.